A racist cop pulls a gun on a black army general. He gets the shock of his life. Major General Sarah Miller, a decorated veteran of the U.S. Army, was about to have a day off like no other. At 42, with her close-cropped hair now streaked with silver, she exuded an undeniable air of authority and discipline. Today, she wasn't in uniform. She was rocking a simple tracksuit and comfy sneakers, blending in with the bustling Saturday crowd at Westfield Mall. But little did she know, this routine trip would turn into a nightmare. After serving for 2 decades in the military, Sarah had seen and endured countless challenges. From leading thousands of troops through dangerous war zones to brokering peace treaties, she had done it all. But today, her only mission was simple: find a new pair of running shoes and maybe treat herself to a smoothie. As she made her way through the high-end athletic store, Sarah noticed a few lingering stares. Now, she was used to turning heads. Her confident demeanor often commanded attention. But these looks were different. They weren't curious or admiring. They were suspicious. It was a feeling she couldn't shake, though she tried to brush it off and continue her shopping. What she didn't know was that Officer Troy Beckett had just entered the mall. Beckett, a middle-aged cop with a tough, gruff exterior, was notorious for his quick judgments and even quicker trigger finger. He had a long history of racial profiling complaints, but the department had always conveniently overlooked them. Though Beckett was off-duty today, dressed casually in jeans and a plain white t-shirt, his badge and pistol were still prominently displayed on his hip. As he passed the athletic store, his eyes immediately locked onto Sarah. There was something about her, maybe her posture, the way she carried herself, that set off alarm bells in his mind. In Beckett's eyes, Sarah didn't fit the typical profile of a shopper at an upscale mall. He loitered near the entrance, pretending to check his phone, but his gaze never left her. He scrutinized her every move, making assumptions based purely on his bias. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her shopping, unaware of the watchful eye trained on her. She found a pair of shoes she liked and made her way to the checkout counter. The young cashier, nervous under Sarah's steady gaze, rang up her purchase. Sarah handed over her credit card, her eyes briefly catching Beckett's stare from outside. He was still watching her, his gaze intense, making her skin crawl. A wave of unease washed over her, but she brushed it aside. She'd been through far worse. But the moment Sarah stepped out of the store, her worst fears materialized. Beckett, having seen her exit, stepped directly in front of her, blocking her path. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said gruffly, his voice cold. "I need to ask you a few questions." Sarah raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Is there a problem, officers?" "You are acting suspicious in there," Beckett replied, his hand resting casually on his holster. "Mind telling me what you were up to?" With years of experience in high-pressure situations, Sarah's patience was wearing thin. "I was buying shoes," she said, holding up the bag for emphasis. "Is that a crime?" Beckett's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Let me see some ID." "Why?" Sarah asked, her voice calm but firm. "Have I done something wrong?" Beckett's grip on his gun tightened, his threat growing more palpable. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." That's when it hit Sarah. This wasn't about what she had done. This was about who she was, about the color of her skin. Her heart sank as the truth dawned on her, but she stood her ground. "I'm not going to let you treat me like a criminal," Sarah said firmly, her voice unwavering. "Officer, I'm going to ask you to step back. I haven't done anything wrong." She stood tall, her military discipline shining through even in the face of injustice. But Beckett wasn't listening. His mind was already made up, clouded by his own prejudice. In a flash, he reached for his weapon, drawing it with alarming speed. The air in the mall seemed to freeze as people turned, unsure of what was happening. Mothers instinctively pulled their children closer, and store clerks peered nervously over the counters. Sarah's heart pounded, but she refused to let panic overtake her. Years of military training kicked in, and she remained calm under the pressure. Slowly, she raised her hands, keeping her movements measured and deliberate, locking her eyes on Beckett. "Drop the bag," Beckett barked. Without hesitation, Sarah let the shopping bag fall to the floor. "Officer," "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice steady. "Don't tell me what I'm doing." Beckett snarled. "Get on the ground." For a brief moment, Sarah hesitated. Kneeling would signify submission, and she wasn't about to give Beckett the satisfaction. "Officer," she said, her voice calm yet commanding, "I am Major General Sarah Miller of the United States Army. I suggest you lower your weapon." For a split second, Beckett faltered. There was a flicker of doubt in his eyes, an undeniable authority in her voice that should have made him reconsider. But his prejudice clouded his judgment. "Yeah, right," he scoffed. "Get on the ground, or else." That's when a voice cut through the tension. A young man, holding up his phone, stepped forward from the crowd. "She just said she's a general, dude. You're pointing a gun at a hero." Beckett's face flushed crimson. "Get out of here," he yelled, his anger rising. But the damage had already been done. More people began pulling out their phones, capturing the scene for the world to see. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and Sarah saw her opportunity. "Officer Beckett," she said, her voice sharp, reading his name from his badge, "you're about to make the biggest mistake of your career. Stand down." For a moment, Beckett hesitated. His hand trembled on his weapon, the weight of his actions sinking in as the murmurs from the crowd grew louder. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Do you know who you're pointing that gun at?" Just then, mall security arrived, 2 guards rushing over, their faces pale as they took in the tense scene. "What's going on here?" one of them demanded. Beckett remained silent, his eyes locked on Sarah, but it was Sarah who spoke up. "This officer has drawn his weapon on me for no reason," she said firmly. "I want to speak to his supervisor." Within 10 minutes, the mall manager arrived, followed by a police captain who had been shopping nearby. The captain, a middle-aged black woman named Denise Harper, looked at Sarah in disbelief. "General Miller," she said, rushing over. "What in the world is going on here?" Sarah calmly explained the situation, her voice unwavering. Captain Harper turned to Beckett, her face a mask of fury. "Holster your weapon, Officer Beckett," she commanded. Beckett hesitated, but the authority in Captain Harper's voice was undeniable. Reluctantly, he obeyed. Turning back to Sarah, Captain Harper's expression softened, regret and sympathy in her eyes. "I am so sorry, General. This is unacceptable." Sarah nodded in agreement. "It is. And I expect it to be dealt with." The fallout was swift and undeniable. The video of the incident went viral, sparking outrage across the nation. News outlets picked up the story, and Beckett's history of racial profiling came to light. Within a week, Beckett was suspended without pay, pending an investigation. Meanwhile, Sarah received an overwhelming outpouring of support from the public and her fellow service members. In an interview, Sarah addressed the broader issue. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice resolute. "It's about countless others who don't have the rank or platform to stand up for themselves. This has to stop." Her story became a rallying cry for justice, highlighting the dangers of prejudice and the crucial need for accountability within law enforcement. Major General Sarah Miller's experience was a powerful indictment of racial profiling and the abuse of power, particularly within police departments. It showed that, despite her social status and personal achievements, she was still subjected to discrimination based on the color of her skin. Her courageous stand, speaking out against injustice, has inspired countless others. This story also underscored the power of community, the vital role of bystanders, and the importance of social media in holding those in power accountable. It was the footage recorded by ordinary citizens that exposed the truth and pressured authorities to act. Ultimately, Sarah Miller's story serves as a sobering reminder that the fight against racism is far from over, and that every single person has a role to play in creating a more just and equitable society.